And Mary, since you had such a prominent role in drafting the letter, I think we should really give you the first opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Janet. I appreciate the cleaning up of the language. We definitely to do some final edits. I have to say I'm very concerned about removing the task force unless there's some other process for continuity. I could see how there is an argument that there creates some redundancy. I also would suggest that if something like that is not created, the fact that we have issued a letter is really an incomplete process, and that there needs to be continuity and vigilance that continues. The idea of the task force is obviously that the council brings a lot to the table, but we are only representing grassroots organizations and environmental organizations in academia. And of course, there would need to be a broader conversation that I'm afraid will not happen unless there's really some attention brought forward to the continuation of this process and some way that we follow up. And if it isn't a task force, I would be interested in hearing what alternatives are. I have to say I'm a little bit concerned about the process. I feel like that's a pretty big change to be thrown at us last minute. And I've spoken to several people who didn't know whether task force was in or out until right now. I was waiting to hear.
Mary,
so
if I could just
interrupt
you for a moment, Mary, just to remind you that we came to consensus at our last meeting that that language would be removed. So it's not a last-minute change.
Task force was taken out?
Yes.
Does anybody else remember that? Because I was not clear that we were no longer proposing a task force.
I remember it. It's reflected in the minutes.
Yeah, that is, I didn't remember that was being taken out. That's surprising. But if it's in the notes.
That's great. First time I'm hearing that.
I simply can't remember which one way or another. I have no recollection of it.
I was under the understanding that we were going to have a task force, just for accountability, that type of thing.
I remember and share the concern that why pass the buck to another body? That it's our job.
Yeah, on the merits of the task force, in my opinion, I would agree with that last statement. I share concerns of creating a redundant task force commission, another body. I mean, that's the purpose of us, that the governor created to assemble us. And then secondly, and similarly, I'm concerned that if we start down the road of having this Environmental Justice Council create this task force, but what about another task force and another topic, another task force? I mean, I think that this is the body that is put in place to look at these issues, and we should focus our efforts on such.
Well, I think there's a concern because there's a lot of question about what our process is and what the role of the subcommittee going forward is going to be. So after this letter is sent, does this particular subcommittee still exist? Are we still working on this? You know, and without knowing that, it's very hard to know what to recommend here.
Yeah, and Carmen Bingham with Virginia Poverty Law Center, and I apologize because I know I am new. I've not been attending these meetings because Dana Wiggins is actually our representative on this council, but as most of you know, she's out on maternity leave. And so coming into this and having read the minutes and the notes and the letters, I'm a little confused as to what exactly is the structure of the Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And it seemed to me that this one singular issue recommendation doesn't encompass everything that we're doing, and I didn't know if this subcommittee, I'm just asking these questions too, I didn't know if this subcommittee was actually just the committee that just works on the pipeline issue, and then do we have other subcommittees within the advisory council that works on other environmental justice issues, because there are plenty in Virginia. I mean, we work on others outside, we don't work on the pipeline as our organization, but we do work on other environmental justice issues, and I'm not seeing any of that addressed in this particular letter. And I didn't know if this was part of a larger letter, and therefore, is the task force really just this subcommittee that works specifically on the pipeline, and they move forward on this issue while we have other subcommittees in the Environmental Justice Council that works on other environmental justice issues across the, I'm asking these questions because I don't know, and I can't see within the material that is available to me what those conversations have been.
We had one previous subcommittee, and that was a subcommittee around ED11, the carbon rules, in which there was a smaller group, I think about 5 total, on the subcommittee, and that subcommittee looked at the carbon rules, wrote a letter of recommendation to DEQ for the comment deadline, I think, in March, and then that subcommittee sort of disbanded? Or disappeared. It may or may not still be there, but we haven't met.
Right.
And so then there was another subcommittee that was created for the pipeline issue. So that's just the history to date. I don't know what's
So
the
is,
role in
if
the
I could
future.
chime in,
Yeah.
this subcommittee, which was termed the pipeline subcommittee at some point, although really the function of it was to be an advance subcommittee. It was formed after we made a decision that we wanted to move to various regions of the state and to get a better understanding of what the issues were in each of the regions, and that in order to do so, we needed kind of an advanced team of folks to go and explore the issues and report back to the council as a whole, to provide us with a briefing memo, and to help us, arrive at the community with a pre-understanding of what the issues were. And so the subcommittee that investigated the Buckingham community is the subcommittee that drafted the letter. And when we move to a different region, we will have an advanced subcommittee that will go before the council, talk with stakeholders, summarize the issues for us in written form, and report back to the group as a whole.
But
And
there
you
is,
call it
but
a deep dive is what you call it.
deep dive,
Yes.
yeah, sure. And so, but there isn't anything that prevents the council from actually creating a regular standing subcommittee that deals specifically on a singular issue.
There's nothing preventing it. I think we are really trying to make decisions
Right.
about how the council is going to function moving forward. And our August 28th meeting will be an opportunity for the full council to, begin to kind of gel our processes, if you will, after, having had about 9 months of work under our belts.
Gotcha.
I hear I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I hear the issue about redundancy, but I also recognize we need to have some kind of follow-through that's solidified for this. So I think we just have to decide what that follow-through
Would be.
team is going to look like, whether it's a task force or a subcommittee, but something substantive that would help us really.
And as a subcommittee, we can make a recommendation, and then when we meet on August 28th, we can consider that recommendation. In that sense, we can make a recommendation to ourselves about what we think should happen moving forward on this issue.
Depending on how the governor might react to what we send him now.
And we may not know that at that point.
Yeah.
I think it's quite likely that we won't. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Peter. It sounds like we have two very related topics. One of them is do we agree that a follow-through, a continued effort along this topic is needed, regardless of how that's implemented?
Right.
And let the record reflect nodding around the table, Mary, just for your and the other people who are on the phone. So, I mean, if there is agreement, then the specific mechanism is the second question, whether or not it's a continuation of the pipeline subcommittee or something else. Another group would have a certain amount of trouble getting as far up to speed as quickly as this would, but it could be handed off to another group. But that also depends on what the governor would say. The governor might say, well, this is a nice thing to put in the file, or say, yeah, this would be a good thing to do. But I see a lot of merit in what the suggestion was, that this is us.
That's right.
Another point too, I just want to make, just recall that, to date, the council has just looked at 2 primary issues, ED11 and the pipelines. And our tactic or our action has been a letter on each one. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way the council is going to work in the future, but that's the way it has been so far. Even still, we are asked within the executive directive to create an annual report. And so there will be that on the back end every year to follow up on all of the actions that the council has taken. So just keep that in mind as well.
My position in this whole thing
Can I
is,
make a point?
If you could just hold that for a moment.
my position in this whole thing, and this is Angela from the Southeast Care Coalition, is to make sure regardless of wherever this EJ Council or any other EJ Council go in any place, space, and capacity, that we don't allow other people to do to a community what has been done to Buckingham County, Virginia, which is go into that community and willingly, openly leave 100 and some odd blacks off the census tract. And to have a meeting in Buckingham County with the Yogaville people the day before to listen, and to know that those people too were involved in this EO11 stuff from the beginning, and to know that that happened to those people, and to have the man there that works for them. They had Chief Joseph there, which is the Indian chief, and to even go on the internet and to see how we knowingly and willingly left those people off the census tract. We need to go back. We don't need to just go in, take a look, know what's going on. We need to be a solution-based organization too, that we can make sure that after we hear the concerns that we are putting our know-hows together to go back to address some of the issues, not just looking for the next grant if it's permitted, if it's granted, if it is, but to use our know-how to go in and to do some solutions to the problem. There is no way in the world that that man from DEQ could stand there knowing that those people were left off the census tract and still have his job. Period. Everybody in this room have a deep, deep, deep thing called your conscience. And if your conscience is not eating at you after listening to that couple from Buckingham County that paid their taxes, that did what they were supposed to do, after knowing that that young lady that with the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that put her work, time, energy, knocked on the doors, that the trucks blocked her in, and she couldn't even come and testify when we were all here on the Capitol and when we were in the room in this building with this EO11. It's just things like that that I don't know how some people is sleeping at night, knowing that that man, I think he was 80, and his wife, they never done nothing to anybody but dotted their I's and crossed their T's, and they have been taken advantage of, and they too old, young to really fight. And when I went in, none of the young people are there helping. So, what happened? Well, doctors, lawyers, scientists, community group, and everybody at the table to say they want to make a difference. And the most socially vulnerable, the community, the children, the women. That's not happening. And we should be ashamed of ourselves. Simple as that.
So there was a comment on the phone.
Here, Angela. This is Mick. And I agree with what you're saying about solutions. And I think this leads into the next conversation, which is about stuff. But just so you know, we have a real gap to put those letter of recommendations in. And I am working currently to set up stuff for the Cap and Trade Subcommittee. Because I'm working with DEQ, there's a role for that subcommittee. That isn't done. If we're just doing, and I'm stepping in to do work in the role as Mental Justice Collaborative, because the council not continued its work on Cap and Trade. I'm also working to set up meetings. In fact, Mike Dowd today asked me to set up a meeting in Buckingham on August 16th with a group of community members. That's the kind of thing that the subcommittee should be doing. It should not be me individually. So if we're arguing that a task force is redundant, I hope everybody who is on this council is ready to pick up their workload and do a lot more than they've been doing, because our subcommittee by itself is not doing this job efficiently. We're not doing enough, and we're going to really need to do a lot more. And we're suggesting there doesn't need to be a body that would include civil rights attorneys and outside academics and people from the different state agencies and all the things that were on that task force. I don't know that this volunteer troop can handle the workload. I know I'm doing it, and I know that I'm filling in where those subcommittees are not functioning, and I will just say that we change our structure if we're going to assume we can do this.
Yeah, I have to agree with her on that as a subcommittee member with that, like knowing the amount of work that needs to be done for this, and I know Mary's taken a huge load of that, to just assume that our subcommittee can take that on all the time is kind of premature, I think. And that's why I think Mary really strongly recommended a task force. It could be selected people that would maybe be able to come together more regularly to do that.
Purpose of today's meeting is to focus on the draft letter. Let's do that, please. That's why we're here.
Well, I think we are focusing on whether or not the draft letter should reflect a consensus by the group that there should be a task force, and I still am not clear on whether we have that consensus. So I think we need to, talk about it for at least a few more minutes.
Janet, can I clarify within the letter itself, or any of the recommendations or the letter in totality of exactly how we're making decisions as a subcommittee or as a body, do we need unanimous approval on any recommendation?
Consensus isn't necessarily unanimous approval. And the way that we had been achieving consensus at our previous meetings is with a kind of a 1, 2, 3 scale of things, and we would kind of go around the room to determine whether council members, were really, really comfortable, were comfortable enough to let something go through, or, or a gradation in between. And that seemed to work fairly well. It has gotten us this far. So I am not clear whether the objections that have been raised about the task force rise to the level of, I don't want the letter to go forward with that language in it. And so we can, I don't know if we're at the point yet where we want to poll the group. We're nearing that point, I think, but I'm not sure we're there yet.
All right, yeah, thank you, that clarifies it.
Well, how would continuity happen if there's no task force?
So if you had something you wanted to say?
Well, I was going to ask about the task force. Is it possible for us to ask for consensus at the end of going through the letter on the different issues that will come up all at once, rather than doing it this way? Because I don't see how we'll ever get past it.
We can certainly do that. So would anyone object to us trying to see if we're content, if you will, with the other changes that have been made in the letter and revisit the issue of the task force after we have discussed the other portions of the letter? Would people feel okay with that?
Well, I think someone over there said that until we can know whether we, or maybe over here, if we're having a task force or not, then we can't even get into the letter. Because the letter at the end, is the task force in or is the task force out?
Well, there's a
And then you
lot of
get
other
the
stuff, besides the task. I mean, even without the recommendations of the task force, we still have a 12 or 13 page letter, which is chock full of recommendations. So, it does seem as if there's other meat in there, whether we are recommending the task force or not.
I'm fine with circling back on the task force. For example, my concern with the task force does not rise to the level of no letter if the task force recommendation is in there. I'm okay with it being in there, but I would prefer that it wouldn't. But that issue alone would not make me move, and so I'm fine with moving on to other recommendations.
So one thing I think we do need to talk about is the responses to the questions that people had raised that went forward to Dominion. And we did get responses yesterday And those were distributed to the council members. I don't know if people have had a chance to look through those. You know, there's a lot of last minute traffic, and I know some folks were probably en route to Richmond at the time that these emails were landing in your inbox. But we do have responses to the questions that were raised after the meeting we had in Buckingham. And, you know, that may or may not influence the wording of the letter. I suspect not. But I do feel it's just only fair to, you know, to raise the issue that we did get responses to the questions that were raised. And if we need to talk through those, now would be the time to do that.
Well, can I ask a process question? Is the goal today to absolutely finalize this? We will not, or will we be able to look over it again for sort of more nitpicky things?
Yeah, the final letter will definitely circulate one more time. And for one thing, it needs to kind of transition. The red lines need to come out, all of the parenthetical things that tell you what was deleted and what was added. Obviously, we would clean it up. We would incorporate any changes that we agree on today and send it around one final time, you know, for kind of the fine level stuff.
And the full council.
Yes, exactly. But I think I reflect the viewpoint of the entire council when I say that we really want to finish the letter.
Yeah.
I know I'm speaking for me when I say that.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
The letter. You know, I really do want to get it out. I think it's only fair that we do that. And I've run out of things to say to people who've been reaching out to me from the community asking, where is the letter? I really dread opening my email box every day. This is usually a message from somebody asking me why we haven't completed this process. So there may not be any other big things. Are there other big things?
Well, I don't know if it's a big thing, but I do have a question about why we're striking the portion about the treatment of persons who are protesting the pipeline.
Which page?
That's on the second page. It starts on the bottom of the second page and ends on the third page.
Is that it?
Second paragraph under topic one.
Paragraph under topic one.
It's under topic one, yeah.
You got it.
Got it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I took that out in response to a concern that was raised in an email to me. So perhaps we need to talk about that one.
Yeah, it concerns me because I think that's a very important part of the entire process, that people be treated humanely and with respect. I understand that there are some times when it creates a great deal of frustration. But I do think that there were some important issues raised here, and I think that the governor and our state should be concerned about, and our federal government ought to be concerned about the way people are being treated. Whether ultimately they rule or decide to move forward with this work or not. I think people should be treated with respect and with recognizing human rights. And so I just don't understand why that's removed. And I don't know who had an objection for it about it, but I don't know if anyone at the table had the objection or who had the objection and what was the objection specifically. You don't remember?
Well, I think that if we need to reinsert the language, then we should just come to some consensus as a group about reinserting the language.
I recall from our last meeting that was a fairly important topic that we had all talked about. It seemed to me that we felt pretty clear that that was important to have in there. I am surprised.
So is it the language that begins a specific area of human rights concern? So we'd like to put that back in. Okay, put it back in. Other concerns?
I don't have a concern about this. Can I raise another topic, or should we?
Absolutely.
My biggest concern with the letter is something that I mentioned back in Buckingham, which unfortunately is, I think is the biggest point of the letter, is the direct call of asking the governor to consider imposing a moratorium on gas infrastructure. My concern with that being included in the recommendation is that the governor issuing a moratorium on all gas infrastructure is outside of the scope of his authority. He can't do that. I mean, unless I'm mistaken, and I'm wrong a lot. And so someone, please correct me if I'm not, but I mean, that is really broad. I mean, we're talking all gas infrastructure, from pipelines to power plant constructions. The governor himself doesn't have the power to stop construction of all gas infrastructure, and so including that as a recommendation to him that he do so, I would have concern with that language in there.
And the specific recommendation that you'd like to change?
So that starts before the recommendations. I think that's on the top of page 2, before it gets to the list of 7. So given the urgency of the topics identified below, the letter then goes through. It says that, yeah, we'd recommend the governor consider imposing a moratorium on construction of new gas infrastructure.
And you saying that that's out of his power?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is there a way to reword that?
Well, I mean, yeah, possibly. I mean, what we had discussed in Buckingham, and again, I don't recall this being a finality, but I think that we had said another way in which you could say it is you could say that we urge the governor to oppose new gas infrastructure. I mean, he can oppose anything. I mean, but even still, I mean, that's weak. I mean, that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, but you don't want to, I mean, I think part of your point was what, the concern that all gas infrastructure means somebody who needs a new gas pipeline in the city of Richmond isn't going to get it. So I mean,
that's way too broad.
And all new gas infrastructure is a bit broad of a phrase, but what we're talking about is
Pipeline.
major pipeline transmissions.
Correct.
That's what we're talking about.
but that's not what this recommendation says.
Right, that's why we're asking about
yeah.
rewording.
So
Not
is that
only is
your-
it legally maybe too broad, but also our focus is environmental justice.
Right.
Not all infrastructure involves environmental justice. We're going way overboard. We need to focus the governor's attention on people's lives being impacted.
That's right.
In very specific situations, not a broad brush.
So I heard some.
I think when you talk about climate justice, all gas infrastructure has an impact on climate justice, which is a direct topic of environmental justice.
I heard some alternative language being proposed.
Well, I mean, if the problem is the word infrastructure, is there another way to word that? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think that you would have to get specific to what exactly are you asking the governor to propose? Like what
Yeah, and
projects or what types? I mean, what are we asking?
And I would also say, as an organization that actually works on legal justice issues, I would want to make sure that any recommendation we give to the governor is something that is actually within his legal purview, because otherwise we lose credibility as an advisory council. If it is not something that he cannot legally do, then our wording is very important to make sure that he takes our recommendations seriously, to to do what we want him to do, or at least to look at the issues that we want him to specifically look at. So if lawyers have not actually looked at this to say, yes, he has the legal purview to grant a moratorium on gas infrastructure in Virginia, then that is definitely something, I'm just saying this as an individual too, definitely something we don't, as a council, want to put into language as a recommendation, because we don't want to be directing our governor to do something illegal.
Yes, right. We need a specific alternative to
And we have to
consider.
figure out what that is.
Well, do we know what the governor has the power to do, ultimately, like with this whole letter?
Yeah, I opted not to go to law school for
For that reason.
very
The whole
good
thing is-
reasons. But we do have some expertise in the room.
But
Yeah,
If we only had a lawyer.
I'll make
Thanks,
a
Angela.
suggestion based on what Mary just said. Perhaps we need to encourage the governor to have his state agencies give him better guidance, ongoing guidance about how the use of fossil fuels impacts disproportionately minority and poor communities. He needs to be educated. We all need to be educated in that.
And your letter does go through some specific recommendations under each topic. I'm not so sure that you need the overall moratorium recommendation, that it is, you could probably couch that as a more general, we have some great concerns, here are our topics. Under each topic of concern are our individual recommendations on how you should be addressing that particular topic of concern.
Yeah, and in a sense, it is organized that way, but there is this preamble section that, really tries to give him a hint, in case he's not gonna read the whole letter, about where we're going.
Yeah, I personally, I was putting that line in there because it felt like if we're saying all these things below there, everything needs to stop until all those things can be addressed, right? Now, I'm not a legal person, I don't know legal if you can do that kind of thing, but it seems to me that particularly given the global crisis we're in with climate change, we cannot follow the same patterns we've been following. We really have to take courage and do something different here. And I think it's our responsibility as a council to do something. And I don't know what the wording is, but I think we really need to say something very clear. We've got to stop building pipelines because, scientifically it's very clear that we can't have that going on. So whatever wording it can be, it needs to happen, I think, to do justice to what's happening globally and locally.
And we need to remind them that these people are human, some kind of way, first and foremost, that they're human and not just a number and not just a dollar, and, just a tax break or tax resources, something like that. These are human beings, real people.
So, we have the current language, which talks about a moratorium, basically directs the consideration of a moratorium on construction of new gas infrastructure. An alternative that's been proposed is that the governor direct his agencies to provide him with ongoing guidance regarding how the use of fossil fuel impacts minority and low-income communities. So, right now, those are the two alternatives.
That is number one of our charge. That is our first charge, is to have the governor direct his state agencies to always include EJ considerations in all of the Commonwealth's business.
Where is that page?
At the footnote at the bottom of page 1.
Yeah, I think that my personal feeling is that I think the statement needs to be clear and strong. I think if there's need to reword it so that we're not, capturing things that are not in the governor's purview or ability, then we should try to word it in such a way that we don't do that. But I do think that it may take a little bit more research to figure out what it is and how to say that, but I think we could still come up with a very clear, strong statement that acknowledges and the need to move away from fossil fuels, period, and move towards more, more, not more, but move towards renewables.
Renewables.
Yeah, and
that
so,
might- Yeah.
and I know that there is specific language, because I know other states have done it, right? I know New York, for instance, I just can't think of it right now, I have to look it up. But I know New York has stopped, and it was the governor's action. And it's federal law that he used, I just don't remember what it is, whether it was EPA or if it was another law.
Could it be a moratorium on state permitting for the pipelines?
Right.
I don't,
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but that was
Yeah.
probably where that was coming from too. is 'cause,
yeah,
New
so I
York
think
did
we
that,
have to
so-
reword it, and
Yeah.
if we reword it to remain, so that it is in the scope of the governor's, responsibility and abilities and authority, would people be happy with that? I guess that would be another thing we can seek consensus at the end about also.
So, I'm hearing from the group that the group would be open to rewording as long as the new statement was clear, and that it included language that's consistent with the overall recommendation we're making, that the potential health impacts on minority and low-income communities be part of the decision-making process, that it emphasizes a shift away from the use of fossil fuels and towards renewables. So if we could come up with some language that did all of that, I'm hearing that the group would be comfortable. We don't necessarily have that, yeah. And that doesn't direct the governor to do something that he's not able to do with the current authority that he has.
Right.
Okay.
But I think there should be something more than just saying you need to pay attention to these things in your state agency, because the whole system is broken. And if we wait for that to happen, there's really no way to address all of these issues with pipelines that we've just brought up. And so if moratorium isn't the language, something that creates that shift from business as usual as we're doing it today is absolutely necessary. And it can't just be, well, you need to do EJ considerations of state agencies. That's a complete pass on my part. I think, I think we need to do that, and it should be everywhere in that letter, but that's not enough.
So I'm going to ask for a couple of volunteers to take that on, redrafting that section. Who could do that? Okay,
I think I could work with you, Faith, on that.
Okay, all right. And how long do you need to do that?
Couple of days.
Couple days.
Okay, all right. All right. So we've got a plan for that section. Other concerns? Okay, so I'm going to circle back to the issue about the task force. Yes.
I did have one other question in there was, when this letter gets sent, I did send a message out about, could we ask a 30-day response or something in terms of like, when this gets sent, it may, there's nothing that says like, we need a response by a certain timeline, given the current urgency of what's happening with pipelines right now.
And so I'm going to ask the staff what we did with our last letter in terms of, did we have language in terms of a timeline for a response? I don't recall that we did.
No, there was not.
That was a comment period.
It was part of a comment period, so there was a deadline to when you could comment, but we did not include a date.
And your reason for imposing a deadline?
That it just wouldn't, I guess I have some concern that we could send a letter and then there's no like quality of what kind of response we're looking for either, like it could be just a ho-hum or it could be like we need more feedback or we need, timeline in terms of it's 6 months later we might get a response and then in a lot of ways that's kind of too late to be able to then have an engaging transformation.
Or could we ask for a meeting?
Or ask for a personal meeting or something. I
Yeah,
just feel like if you go into a black hole.
I don't know that that asking him for a response by a given date is strategically the most effective way to get him to pay attention and listen to us, but letting him know that time is of the essence here. We've got things that are moving along, and we look forward to his response at his earliest convenience. Like I've been involved with letters that go to high officials and say, we need your response by a certain date. You don't even get an acknowledgement of receipt until almost that date, whether it's an agency who shall not be named or an elected official. So that would be my concern. Say, yeah, we want your response in a week. Good luck.
And
You won't even
I
see
guess-
him in a week.
I guess my concern is that ultimately, I think whatever response the governor chooses to take is a response to the community. It's not necessarily a response to us. But, that's kind of my personal viewpoint.
I will say as staff, that the office of the Secretary of Natural Resources, as the governor's constituent services team, we do try to respond to as many as possible. And so I think there are levels to different letters, of course, of whether it's individually responding to everyone, so that's volume, but I don't necessarily know if that should be a huge concern, but we understand your concern. And I think
And we can just convey that
Yeah.
we'll response quickly.
yeah, we're kind of here for that, to make sure that
Yeah.
he's well aware that there's a response that is needed.
I got a question. The governor is just one part of our wonderful Virginia team. So are we just sending this letter to just the governor, or do you think that he could use a little help by sending it to maybe everybody that work with him, the congressmen, the delegates, the senates, and try to definitely send it to him, but hold everybody accountable, because together each accomplishes more. So where we can't get it into just one individual, if we kind of CC the whole team and get everybody involved and engaged, and that don't leave no room for no one to say, I didn't know, you should have told me, if you had told me I would have got involved, and all that cool, wonderful stuff. So I just think that even if we address it to the head person, with us having this wonderful, what we call torch pass, and with this wonderful group called this EJ Collaborative, we've been blessed to have one governor come in to take pictures with us, and another one come in as the other one went out. So that's a lot of juice, and it's a lot of juice on a lot of pages and web pages. So with all that juice and all those good, wonderful pictures, I'm thinking that if we use some of those pictures and some of those connects and try to do accountability where we don't have no loose ends, because Virginia is big, and this council is put together so that we can cover north, south, east, west. Accountability is what we need, and if we opt out to just hold one person accountable, when we have a whole team that's connected from north, south, east, and west, and we won't leave nobody off the census tracts again. Because there was not one or two people left off the census tract. It was 130-something black people left off. So accountability across the board. CC everybody that worked for you.
And I think what's likely to happen, once we sign on the dotted line and submit this letter, then I think it becomes the work of the groups who helped to create the climate for our council to be created, to take what will be a public document and do exactly what you've suggested, which is to circulate it broadly. But it's going to be addressed to the governor, because we're set up to give recommendations and advice to the governor. But I think that won't stop there.
Yes.
And I think some of the groups who have been coming and talking with us and who helped to create the climate for this council to be created are going to use it in other ways.
And even they need accountability, transparency, community involvement, public input, and all that cool, wonderful stuff. So transparency across the board and making sure that we are not speaking for the people, that we are empowering the people to speak for themselves. Period. And they're human.
So I think we've made some progress.
Can I ask, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Were we still working on the letter?
We are.
Okay. Because I have a question about what's highlighted in yellow. Why is that? I didn't
Yeah.
understand why
I
that. Was that in
highlighted-
addition?
I highlighted some sections in yellow to flag them for death.
Okay.
And because of the lateness of the hour, it took me 4 days longer than I thought it would take me to get the editing process done. I had to send it out to everybody at the same time, but there were some things that I specifically asked them to take a look at, and I highlighted them.
Okay.
So that she
All right.
could look at them.
That was just one
And she
question.
did, and she got back to me about them.
Okay, so those are okay.
Those are okay.
So then the other question I had has to do, it starts on the page 9. There's quite a bit stricken. The records below suggest potential for error or misdeed. That's stricken for some reason. I just want to know why, or what were the objections to that?
I couldn't find a reference for that phrase that I was comfortable with. And, virtually everything else has been really very meticulously referenced. And so.
You want a couple 50 references on that one? I'd love to do it.
So that's why I pulled it. Page 9, I think we're talking about.
Yeah, the bottom of page 9 where it starts in the red where it's stricken.
I was stuck in yellow.
Where you have it the strike.
So that was the reason.
So Mary had a response to that.
Just that there's no lack of evidence, so if we want evidence, I would be very happy to provide. Just tell me, what level you would like it to come from, the local up to the national, and I can get you very many references. That's not a problem.
How long would it take you to provide that for us, Mary?
As quickly as you need it.
So we have a couple of days, we have some folks working on revising some other language, and so today is Thursday.
Wednesday.
Monday? I'm thinking Monday is a reasonable day to shoot for in terms of these revisions. Do you think you could have something in by then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then again on page 11 we've stricken the evacuation language
That was a request
from
a council member.
Do you know why? I mean,
Again, I think there was concern about whether it was adequately referenced and whether it was accurate.
I've got a lot on the evacuation, if that's what you need to see. I know it's one of the biggest concerns right now in Buckingham.
right.
So I don't think that would be hard to document. That's just a huge issue. And I have tons of information that I could add if it's lacking references.
Okay,
The big issue in the MVP.
maybe
as well.
something brief. I don't think we need tons. But if you could provide something brief that documented that, then I think we could stick it back in. But I was asked to take it out.
Yeah, I think there's documentation on every single thing that was put in there. And, it could have been a 200-page letter with all of that in there.
Oh yeah, that needs to go back in there. Definitely, because that's all our work dealing with that
Well, we
sea
don't
level
even have a
rise.
great evacuation plan for the sea level rise issue in Hampton Roads. So, I mean, evacuation is a major issue around the state. I mean, I don't know that we need that much documentation that this is an issue.
But we have it though.
Right.
We can provide that information with that whole community project that we did with Michelle Colby and Roy Hoagland. All that information for this speaks to this whole project.
Okay.
We
By
can do that.
Monday?
By today, Eric,
So I think you're right. I think getting something documented is not, a full white paper that gives you the complete documentation.
Right.
There are sources that indicate, that support this point.
Right.
Yeah,
You're right
that's-
there.
that's
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
It's not another full page.
Can I ask a clarifying question? And Mary, you may be, or whoever initially wrote that sentence. Are you trying to say that in Virginia, the recovery plans have prioritized tourism in high wealth areas over low income communities, or there is a concern that the existing plans would do so?
I think that there's evidence that the plans until now have done exactly that, and that environmental justice was kind of an add-on. There's slightly more discussion about it. I would say Angela has better, and Michelle has better information on that, but what I have read on the topic is that yes, it has already happened that way. And for example, people are told that prisoners are going to be put on the trains, but how are other people going to get out? So it's happening. It's in the plans. There is that inequality. It absolutely.
and you can actually read that stuff. It's a part of the whole community program that was done with FEMA, EPA, the White House. All that stuff is listed from top to bottom. And we will have it to you by Monday.
Thank you. In terms of recovery, there's a lot of evidence we studied on NEJAC, the EPA, which counties all along the Gulf Coast got the most FEMA money, and it was very racially inequitable. All along the Gulf Coast after Katrina.
And if we can't get Virginia-specific references, then the national references, I think, would be the second best.
But we got Virginia, and we also have a partner down in Mississippi that deals with the Katrina stuff, and that's the STEPS Coalition. So we would reach out to them to ask them, to join in with us to give you something from both port cities.
And, just to be clear, my role, is to really reflect the concerns that come to me from council. Not that I don't have a viewpoint, I've got one.
Right.
And I'm very happy to share it. But my role as the chair is to, if people raise concerns, I have to put it on the table. Okay.
And Dr. Phoenix, I would make a point though that in your references, stick to Virginia references. I would not use national references only because and this is my background, I'm working with the legislature and the governor over the last 2 decades. It's far more compelling to stick to what's happening actually in Virginia.
In fact,
And because those are the people that they are concerned about and those are their constituents. And so it just makes it much more compelling to them what's happening actually in Virginia. And if we have actual cited references of injustices going on in Virginia, that's when it begins.
will it be a conflict of interest if the now sitting governor's wife participated in that whole community project? Will it be a conflict of interest for us to get some insights from her, being that she worked on that project with me and Michelle Colby? She was actually on that emergency.
That would kind of be.
Is it a conflict of interest?
That would be her call.
Okay.
I don't see where it would be a conflict, but it would be her call as to whether or not she'd be willing.
So I think that Dr. Phoenix draft her a letter and definitely ask her to share her notes, because we had some real interesting conversations when we sat on that whole community project at ODU. She had some real interesting points, and if you can read some of that language in that stuff, but she's up there too, and she's now the governor's wife. I think that's legit.
So I'm going to go around again and ask if there are other sections that council members would like to flag. And if not, we'll kind of revisit the issue of the task force and see if we can get consensus on that. So,
Just a thought, if you have time, the governor alone can't solve all this stuff. So I'd love for us to also include an educational component that it's incumbent upon this council and the governor and the state agencies, everybody, to educate the public about all these important topics.
are you suggesting that we add some language about that to the letter?
I'm asking, yes, yeah.
You know, we talked about this, we've talked about this before.
You did.
Yeah, well, I mean, at our first meeting, and I think at a second meeting, and this isn't the first time you've raised this important topic. And the thing, and I have a related topic, is that there is no cross-agency environmental justice anything.
Yeah,
There-
everything's reactionary, that's my point.
Right, and ad hoc.
And ad hoc.
This agency is doing something by itself in isolation, and there's no education, the public doesn't get anything, there's no cross-agency environmental justice council, nor is there any education component, other than some of it within the Department of Ed. So, are we better off to put a separate letter, making a separate recommendation to the governor saying, we recommend that a lot of the things that we put into the two things that we've sent you would be accomplished if we did two things. Number one is a broad educational policy. Number two, a multi-agency under the governor's office, environmental justice.
I am wondering.
Is that a separate thing, though, so that it does not get attached just to this? So that's the question.
That seems like a.
I mean, health, education, environment, transportation, mining,
Yeah,
all of them.
absolutely.
If you go online to Southeast Care Coalition /ODU, there's a pilot program right now on the website that ODU, Michelle Colby, the sitting governor's wife now, that pilot program exists. You gotta go online, Southeast Care Coalition, ODU. It's the academia community group program. It's a pilot program. It's tagged to the Dutch Dialogues. Roy Hoagland worked on that program before he switched and gave the seat to Angela King and Elizabeth Andrews. So that pilot program exists. It's called Southeast Care Coalition, ODU. Roy Hoagland, Michelle Colby, the college lady that used to govern this group. All of them are involved in FEMA, the White House, EPA. Take a look at that, baby. It's a pilot program. A pilot program means you can get in the seat and drive. Why are we not using it? I don't know. And it does exist.
I think that we could include a couple of sentences in the preamble section of this letter where we kind of really are rehashing, you know, the foundation of environmental justice and why it's necessary for groups like this to exist, and it wouldn't hurt to put a couple of sentences there. But I would like to see us pay a little more attention to that. And the annual report that we have to give seems like a really good place for us to spend some time on that. And we're supposed to talk about that at the August 28th meeting, is how we're going to draft that report and when we'll finish it and get it in. So I would suggest that we do both, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to maybe draft the couple of sentences that we could put in the preamble section of this letter that reflects that by Monday.
I even have a metaphor we can use. To me, this whole exercise has been like wrestling with an octopus.
I can think of other metaphors.
But I will, I'll write.
All right. Task force. I'm getting the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we should put the task force language back in, but perhaps with some caveats. That's what I've been hearing, and so let's revisit that issue.
I share Mary's concern about continuity. Amen, Mary. But to me, continuity, it rests with this council. I just hate to see us recommend creation of some other new body. That's classic bureaucracy.
Could we do a test for consensus on the language as it stands itself? In or out? Just to see where we.
On the whole language or just
Or
the
just on
task
the in
force?
or out question?
Yeah, keep it in or.
Keep it in or keep it out?
I think that's rushing things because I can't decide how I'm going to vote on the task force until I know how else you're addressing continuity.
And I think we're not going to be able to answer the continuity question today.
But this council isn't going anywhere, is it? Do we
No,
fade out at
no.
some point?
But the amount of
Miriam's
attention.
shaking her head no.
I think the amount of attention and the form of the attention that we continue to pay to this community and this issue is one that the subcommittee is not going to be able to resolve today. We could make a recommendation, but that's something that the full council is going to have to decide. And the full council doesn't meet again until the 28th. So we're not going to be able to resolve that question today.
So let me put staff on the spot here for a moment. How much support by not only the council but a subcommittee, it doesn't have to be this specific one, but any subcommittee going might get in the future?
Support in what way?
Staff time to help research and development and do the follow-up. Mary ran through a long list of things, and there were a lot of people nodding their heads about, yeah, that, need to do that, need to do that, need to do that. And volunteers have a certain amount of time, energy, and sweat equity to put into it, unless they're independently funded. So the only other place to get it is from people who work in their office. And I know that you can't make a blanket commitment,
Right.
and I'm not asking you to,
Right.
but I mean, is it pie in the sky for us to say, yeah, we'll continue to do this, and we're going to need support?
Right, there are conversations to be had at our full body meeting about possible ways of resources to better support you. You will always have Trieste and I staffing the council. Unfortunately, I'm not able to commit any other resources or actually think about it.
What would be helpful is if you could articulate exactly what kind of support you'd want for the subcommittees, and then we could talk to our folks about that and see what is possible. So I think right now, yeah.
I just want to raise that, I'm very appreciative of your all's help in facilitation, that I think when it comes to anything more than facilitation, like substantive research, that really gets into the question of whether we're an independent council.
Right,
right.
Relying
I think
on
generally,
the governor's office to
right,
help with that.
generally, the council, folks have expertise that they bring to the table or do research to create documents like this, and that's usually where the recommendations come from. But as far as state support, I'm happy to look into it if there are specific things. But I'm not sure if that is what you all would agree on or what you want. So
You would just need a better understanding of what resources you would.
I think the bigger question is what's reasonable for our group as a whole to take on. Given that we agreed in earlier meetings that we were going to really try to focus on the entire state and take a very methodical approach to moving to different communities across the state. So in my mind, that's a bigger question, because if we do that with this same group, the same number of bodies in the room, the same number of potential subcommittee chairs, I think there's a limit in terms of what we can tackle. So I think we've used a system of 3 fingers for moving ahead with something. two kind of meaning move ahead, but, you know, I'm not 100% committed. And one meaning, you know, I've got enough objections that I really wouldn't feel comfortable if you went forward with something. So that's kind of been our system in the past. So could we see the people who feel really, really strongly about moving forward with including the language describing the emergency task force? So those would be 3 fingers.
So what's the question again?
The question is, do you feel strongly about reinserting the language recommending the emergency task force? And if so, could you please hold up 3 fingers? So I see 4 people holding up 3 fingers, okay?
And Mary, are you abstaining or are you a 3?
Yeah, I'm a 3.
Mary's
Although I'm not totally clear on what are the other options, but.
Yeah.
Well, 2 fingers and 1 finger right now are the other 2 options.
No middle finger.
So 2 fingers means you go along with it, but, you know, maybe don't feel 100% that it's the thing we
3 of
ought to
those.
do. So we got 3 of those. Anyone on the phone with 2 fingers? So 3 of those.
Oh, Janet?
Yes.
I'm not actually on the subcommittee.
It doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't
Council,
matter.
all council members can vote. And are there any people who would feel uncomfortable moving forward with reinserting the language, that they would like to state a strong objection to reinserting the language? So that would be 1 finger.
Yeah, I know I asked to move it, and I haven't voted. I'd like to 1
I
and a
did
half.
notice that.
Too much thinking there.
Yeah, I'm debating.
Have you ever been to Russia?
Before Dewan answers, VPLC, we are absolutely abstaining simply because this is, and I think Dana has stated this from the very beginning, the pipeline issue is not an issue that we as an organization have actually delved into, and so we don't have the expertise or the resources to really understand fully all of the issues that surround it, and just because of where we are organizationally, we're just not able to say yay or nay or approve, disapprove. It's just we are absolutely neutral on this.
I'd like to add, from my lens, not only Indian Tribe of Virginia, you know, I lived in a time when there was a Virginia Council of Indians, and I've lived in a time when there's not. And so we do not have a formal body where we meet, we used to, and have that relationship with the governor's office and the other agencies. And I alone, while I know a lot of people in the different communities, I can't speak for every single community, and I can't, you know, I just can't. I can definitely point us in the right directions, but I think under the task force language, you know, the impact of urban rural populations and native communities, I think we really need to be mindful of the fact that there's so many layers to that, and so any additional support for that is going to be needed, and woefully has not been done for, I mean, it's been a long time. I think it was Buckingham was in office, so.
We had 5 members who were strongly in favor of reinserting the language about the emergency task force, 3 members who could go along with it, and 2 members who were who don't feel that it should move forward. And in the past, we have moved forward with things when we had a very small number of council members who had significant objections.
Well, just one.
You're saying there was just 1 objection?
No, in the past, if there was just one.
There were 2.
objection.
There were 2.
No,
Oh, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah.
So I think this means that we will be reinserting the language. That's how I'm interpreting it.
You're allowed to vote too?
I did vote.
She did, yeah.
I was a 2.
Can I ask for those that feel strongly about reinserting the language, under the assumption that the moratorium language would be changed, what would be the function of the emergency task force? Like, what would they do?
To my knowledge, the last time we talked about the task force, that would be the group that goes in to do the deep dive before the council actually get there, and that group would be chosen among us to go in to do the deep dive. They were talking about, you know, that the subcommittee, it was too much last time, too much on one person, that type of thing, so that's how the language came about, I thought. So that we wouldn't be so much on one person and we could have some type of relationship before we just go in and just bring our agenda. At least we'll know what we're going into. That's what I thought.
Yeah, I thought that was, you know, what we talked about, like for the subcommittee structure. But particularly, okay, so on page 13.
Mary, since she's the one.
Can I answer?
Please.
Yes, please.
So part of it is that discussion that the state agencies aren't talking, and so if you look at the list, it would pull in people from health, from public health. It would pull in people from historic preservation. It would pull in people who work on indigenous rights, civil rights, and environmental issues. So first of all, getting those state agencies in the room. Second of all, it did have a place for Dominion at the table. I think Dominion needs to be hearing directly and in part of that conversation. So I think that that's important. It has independent people on there, such as lawyers, academics, people who do research in these areas and that aren't influenced by state or private sector. It has impacted community members who are not getting a direct voice. It had the state water board and the state air board, and they have not been brought into these conversations. So we might be talking about environmental justice and saying how these different agencies aren't talking together. If we just pass on this task force and we don't encourage the fact that those people get in the room and urgently look at the fact that there are human rights violations and environmental justice violations happening across the state as a result of these pipelines, how else is this next step going to happen? How is that communication going to happen? Where else would that conversation that could build some bridges and that could create some true solutions today to some of those problems we've identified in our letter? How else is that going to happen? And people need to look at it urgently. So this would not do staff. All of those people are on staff except for the impacted community. So they'd have to be willing to drive in and participate, which I'm sure they would. But everybody else has a job, in which case it would be on, the time of their job to be able to contribute to this. It's not something that our little troop can do. And unless those state agencies halt, none of the problem solving that we just suggested we did in that letter is even going to be discussed in the type of detail and with follow through. So that's why the task force came about. I don't think it's a perfect model, but I haven't heard anybody present to me a better model for follow through that involves state, private sector, impacted communities, and then independent academics and other professionals.
Thank you, Mary. So I think we've got a pretty clear picture of what it could do.
And I just wanted to add I haven't been on the subcommittee, so I've been a little bit out of the discussions, but from reading the drafts that have gone around, the way I've understood it is that we're not asking for an absolute moratorium. I don't think, anyone expects that would happen. It's more of a suspension while things are considered, and we consider, and the administration, everyone else considers how to go forward, whether to go forward, how to go forward. And so that would be kind of the negotiating committee, so to speak. That would be the group that would come together, put their heads together, and figure out how we can address these really important environmental justice issues, and whether or not there is any moving forward with the pipeline, or if there are other energy projects, or so it's kind of I don't see how you can have a moratorium or a suspension without some type of body coming together to talk things out.
It's logical.
So is the question, is the problem with the language task force? Because the task force, until she explained that, I understood it to be a body that would do some additional kinds of research that we haven't already done. In other words, that they would be looking at the actual permits and well, I'm sure you want that too, but I'm just wondering whether the issue is that these other organizations have not addressed or do not take into consideration environmental justice, and is there another way to ask for that beyond or without it being a task force? Could it be a conversation, a conference, because to me a task force sounds like something that is an ongoing body. Is that what you had in mind, or?
I think that it came up earlier in the conversation. I can't remember who raised it, but to me it would be as simple as like in the annual report, asking the governor to direct all of his cabinet secretariats and all state agencies to explore issues of environmental justice. That would serve the purpose that this task force is aiming to serve.
I think this task force will keep us true and authentic to the mission. I think that it's a checks and balance situation where we could take a look at ourselves and others so that we won't just be looking for others to do right and we're not doing right ourselves. It'll balance it out. It would bring solutions, not just problems, and it'll hold everybody accountable. That's what I think the task force would do. Be transparent, accountability, and a balance for everybody. That's what I think.
I don't, when I,
Can I
the word
put the
task,
word emergency on there?
What?
I'm sorry, what did you
Thank you,
say?
Mary.
Say again, Mary?
So, Mary, did you want to make?
Oh, I was saying, can,
Yes.
Go ahead.
to point out, and I don't love the word task force. I think emergency body, I was, faced with saying, what else could it be? I mean, task force to me also has a negative connotation, like another body that's gonna take a long time. I think emergency is imperative, so I don't agree just saying reflect on the lack of environmental justice in all policies is the exact same thing. In fact, I think it's pretty much dead opposite of what we're asking for. Asking for an emergency response. We're not asking for in 5 years, we'll say, oh yeah, this doesn't work, huh?
So like an emergency response team.
Yeah, we've talked about this being like
Yeah.
a window within the fall, like it would go up until like November. And it
Yeah,
would
I
be
mean,
a-
I'm not sure that we can decide what the timing of the body will be. I mean, it sounds like could someone someone on the phone mute their line? We're getting a lot of background noise. Thanks. I'm not sure that as a group we can direct the timing of this body that we're recommending could be convened. It's called a task force right now. I mean, to me, that language doesn't convey long-term. To me, it's short, it's focused. I've heard the term task force used in a short and focused way before. But I do think that depending upon what language for the earlier reference to the moratorium, depending on what that language works out to be, that will probably also get inserted here to kind of describe what this group does. But I heard consensus as close as we're going to get ever, I think. It's rare, I think, that we're ever going to 100% agree on something. So I think we're going to move forward with this recommendation. We're going to get some additional language on the revision of the complete moratorium language, and we're also going to get a couple of sentences about opportunities to really broaden the knowledge and awareness of environmental justice across the state, and that will go in the first part of the letter. And there's one other thing, the references for some of the references to the emergency climate change relocation provisions. Those references will go in, and we'll get all of this by Monday. We'll revise the letter, and it will go back out for just a, kind of a final edit review.
And how many hours do we have?
Pardon?
How many hours will we have?
To review it,
Is it
how many
24
hours do you need?
I have a hearing on Tuesday and I can do it on Wednesday, but I'm completely out.
Yeah, I'm thinking 48 hours probably makes sense. So if we get it out on Monday morning, and give everyone till Wednesday night, to make any final small tweaks, not big things, but small tweaks. Would people feel comfortable with that? Yes?
Yeah, that's fine. Can I make 2 recommendations?
Absolutely.
Whenever, the next couple of days, when the recommendation to create the emergency body, whatever it is, I would just have 2 recommendations in the verbiage of what the scope and how that body should develop. One, as is now, it says emergency task force should place a moratorium on construction of new gas infrastructure. I would recommend that we not direct an outcome for this body. If the idea is that we're getting together people who are experts to do a deep dive, that we don't say that, well, here's the solution that you should come up with, right? That we just leave that open-ended, whatever,
I read that as-
of whatever comes.
I didn't read that that way.
You don't lock them in.
I read it as governor place a moratorium pending completion.
But we already
of the
said
survey.
that earlier, so.
Right, we were going to take whatever language we put in the earlier part of the letter
Right.
that revises the moratorium here as well.
Right.
So are you saying we shouldn't do that?
Unless, I would say, if it's a specific solution, I would recommend that we let the body look at issues of environmental justice and let that body of experts come to whatever recommendation that body feels should be recommended.
Yeah, and this is just for clarification, and again, we are neutral on this issue itself, but in terms of structure, is the emergency task force reporting back to the council? They're reporting directly to the governor? I mean, where are the recommendations going?
Right.
What's the structure beyond
Yeah.
what happens out of the task force, comes out of the task force? I think that should be spelled out in there.
And along with that, I do have one other question about the task force, and that is given that many of the agencies are permitting agencies, and some of them have already given permit, how would we ensure that they actually understand, interpret, address, engage the issues of environmental justice any differently?
I mean, really, we're making a recommendation that the group be formed.
Right.
And if the governor moved forward, I'm sure the governor would have some instructions in terms of who the group reported to, how the agencies might review decisions that have already been made. I'm not sure that that's our decision. Do we want to make specific recommendations for that? I guess is my question to you.
That's the question I
One
was
approach
raising.
is the federal approach. Bill Clinton, 1298, ordered all federal agencies
That's
to
right.
conduct an EJ analysis, just like an EIS, every time there's a federal project. And they have to use intra-agency task force working together.
And we have done that or not done that?
We
Nope.
here in Virginia,
No,
Right, so there you go.
not officially, I don't think
Right.
it's there.
we're not federal.
Right.
Right.
It's a federal agency.
No, I know, but I'm just asking, have we done something similar?
Yeah, I would recommend the governor
Ask EJ, they'll tell you no.
order
Throw
it.
it in there. I mean,
Regardless of however way you form this task force, we want it to reflect solutions and that the community be engaged and involved, and that this task force is not created like another body to speak and go in and to do what happened with Buckingham, state to state, port to port, north to south, east to west. There has to be some type of accountability and loyalty that speaks in the language that solutions, and to make sure that the elders and the children are involved with their own livelihood and future. Some kind of way, if that's not what we're doing, then, you know, the task force should come from these experts and these partners that we have, you know, in all these little organizations and groups, that this thing right here, if you look at the EPA CARE stuff, the blueprint that Obama has already put in place, that worked, that got defunded, this stuff is already there. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, even at this table, we don't have to recreate this wheel. We can go look at what the brother already did, tier 1, tier 2, grassroots groups around the country with expertise, and we can tap in and reach in, and we should have a better result. So if you're going to do a task force, make sure that the people, we put the people first, and that we're not just going in highlighting problems without coming to the table with solutions.
That's my concern. I agree with you, Angela. I mean,
That's my concern.
That's my concern, is that we
First and foremost.
we create a new task force or body, and that's another, again, I think Mike, you said, that's another bureaucracy, and that's more waiting. And you know, so they have to convene and get together and deliberate and come up with recommendations. It's just another thing that the community is waiting on. So that's my concern.
But I have read this, I guess, all along as the idea is that the moratorium is placed pending the review of the task force. So the task force
You mean like a
job,
stay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the task, so that creates an urgency, that makes it an active body. I mean, maybe I was reading that wrong. So.
And I just want to know what the language should say.
We need to get the agency heads to work better together.
Yeah, that needs to be.
With all due respect to Mary, maybe Mary knows more than I do, but I don't agree that they're not working together at all, that they don't talk to each other. June 14th, less than 2 months ago, we had graduation ceremony in Charlottesville of Virginia Natural Resources Leadership Institute, our 19th year. I started that program at UVA. Every agency head comes every year. I sat at the dinner table with Bob Duncan, DGIF, David Paylor, DEQ, David Spears, State Geologist, Rob Farrell, State Forester, Bettina Rink, Secretary of Ag and Forestry. And the only topic at the dinner table, folks, was the pipelines and environmental justice. They are well aware of this big challenge to our Commonwealth.
Yes.
The time is right to just urge them, have the governor urge them to work together on a more consistent basis.
And I think a moratorium would do that. Would be the impetus to make them work together on a more consistent basis.
But a moratorium is a hammer, a real hammer.
You need the hammer.
Use it.
You need it, man.
Okay, so it's 3:10. And I have not heard any specific suggestions for revising this language. So I'm going to move forward. If I receive something over the weekend, I'll be faithful to that. I'll put it in. Okay? And we can review it, and if we are comfortable with it, the letter will move forward. Okay? But we have other business we need to get to today. And so